Hey everyone, Howie Fisher from Precision Fly Fishing in Mount Holly Springs, Pennsylvania, and today I'm bringing you the Fly of the Week episode. Today in this video, I'll be tying up a gotcha shrimp. This is traditionally a bonefish pattern, but it can honestly be used for any saltwater species that will eat shrimp, and it can be tied obviously in a bunch of different sizes, colors, weights, etc. I'm using an SA 250 from Ahrex. This is their bent shrimp hook. For the thread, I'm going to be using 140 denier in fluorescent pink. I've got this spooled up on my bobbin. I'm going to start with my thread pretty much right behind the hook eye, and then I'm going to bring my thread all the way down the hook shank. Once I get about halfway, I'll go ahead and snip off my tag. I like to leave the tag in for the front portion of this fly to allow for a base for the dumbbell eyes that I'm going to tie on. Before I tie the dumbbell eyes in, I like to bring my thread all the way back into the bend. I do this for a lot of patterns, streamer patterns, especially when I'm production tying them. So I'm going to bring it back to about the barb point for this specific pattern. And that way I have a tie-in point. So when I start tying my other materials in, I'm going to bring them all back to that spot so I know where to stop. And I'm going to do that on every single one of these that I tie when I'm tying up half a dozen or a dozen. So I have the same consistency in each fly. After I've done that, I'm going to return my thread to the front of the hook. And I'm going to take my thread back and forth a couple times, just about a quarter down the shank, a third down the shank. And again, what I'm doing here is I'm building up a base for the dumbbell eyes to sit on. Just gives them a little bit something more to grab onto. And again, I'm going to go take my thread back and forth a few times before I add those dumbbell eyes. So once I've got a base, I'm going to go ahead and grab my dumbbell eyes. I'm using brass eyes in medium. This is a Hareline product. You can obviously use whatever dumbbell eyes you want, or bead chain eyes if you're fishing different waters, so on and so forth. So for the eyes, I like to put my eyes up against the front of the hook, as you can see here. And again, this is for consistency. If you want the eyes a little bit further back, you can measure the back of the hook eye. For this pattern, I'm going to put the front of my dumbbell eyes up against that hook eye. And again, this is for consistency. As I'm tying each pattern, I know that each eye I'm going to have in the same spot if I measure it the same way. So I'm going to switch hands, and then I'm going to put my thread where the back of that dumbbell eye is, again for consistency. And then I'm going to start by tying in my dumbbell eyes. And I'm going to start by taking 3 wraps in each direction. So 1, 2, and 3, all in the same direction. And then I'm going to switch directions and do 1, 2, and 3. And what I'm going to do at that point, after I take a wrap or 2 around the hook shank, I'm going to add some super glue here. And again, for consistency's sake, so you can see, these are pretty much spot on. If I wanted to, I could move those dumbbell eyes on the one I'm tying up a little bit to be this more even with the one that I've tied, but they're pretty close. Another thing you can do is you can tie up one and use that as a consistency piece. So if you're tying more material in front of the hook eye, again, you can move those eyes further back. And again, it just helps you to help with consistency if you're tying up several of these. So again, once I've got those eyes where I want them to, I'm going to go ahead and grab some super glue. Here I'm using Zap-A-Gap in medium. Just going to go ahead and coat those thread wraps, kind of get it in the top and bottom. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go straight into circular wraps. I'm going to take wraps around the base of the thread wraps that I already took to cinch those in and kind of secure some of that super glue. Then I'm going to just hit it with a bunch more cross wraps in both directions. And again, bring wraps around the base to draw those wraps in. From there, I'm going to bring my thread backwards to get started on the body. And in my jaw, I'm going to bring my hook back to seat in the grooves in my vise. So the first material that I'm grabbing is Flashaboo. I'm using Midge, Flash, and Pearl. You can use regular, mix up the color depending on the species you're going for, the color you're actually tying, but here I'm just using plain Pearl. It's a pretty all-purpose color for salt water. So I'm going to go ahead and snip a couple strands free, double it around my thread, and secure it on the bottom of the hook shank, or what will be the bottom. Currently it's the top, but this fly is going to ride hook point up with those dumbbell eyes on the bottom. So I'm going to tie this on the same portion as the dumbbell eyes, and I'm going to bring it back to that tie-in point that I created where that thread ends. And then I'm going to bring my thread a little bit back to right behind the eyes. And I like to do this again for consistency's sake. It makes building the body a little bit better. But my next material is flat diamond braid and pearl. Again, use the color that you need or want. And I'm going to tie this in right behind the dumbbell eyes. This is going to help create a smooth body and a little bit of a natural taper. Again, this step isn't necessarily crucial, but it creates a cleaner fly, an easier tied fly. So again, I'm going to bring my thread all the way back to that back tie-in point that I created where that thread stops. And then I'm going to go ahead and return my thread back to behind the dumbbell eyes. And all I'm doing here with these wraps is, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm covering up any other pearl that's showing through, any flash that's showing through, because I want this pink actually, and this is the reason why I'm using this pink thread. I want this pink to show through when I wrap that pearl tinsel forward, or that. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap my diamond braid forward, and then I'm going to go ahead and secure it right behind the dumbbell eyes, and I'm going to secure this in between the shank and the hook point, so on the opposite side of the hook shank as the dumbbell eyes. And the reason why I'm doing this is because we're not going to snip off that extra. We're actually going to bend this back and create a little bit of an underwing. So I'm going to bend this, fold it over, take some wraps over it to make sure that it's pointing backwards towards the hook bend. And then I will snip it. I'm using the very end of a piece that I was using for a couple of these. And so this is the very end of the piece, so I only had to cut off a little bit. But if you work with a longer piece, you'll cut it off and then reuse it. But I'm going to cut that about the length of the hook shank, or to the end of the hook. And now I'm going to cut this crystal flash. I like to do this now so that when I'm wrapping material forward or anything like that, it doesn't get tangled up or anything like that. That's just a personal preference how I like to do it. So once I've done that, I'm truly almost pretty much done with the fly. The last material that I'm really grabbing is this Arctic fox hair in tan. You can use faux fox hair, you can use a various number of different things, but this Arctic fox hair is nice. It comes in a small patch, but it's super dense, it's super thick, so you get a lot of material out of these little patches. So I'm going to go ahead and grab really truly just a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and snip it free, and then I'm going to go ahead and switch hands, and I'm going to go ahead and pull out any short fibers from the bottom end and just prepare my hair. Once your hair is prepared, you go ahead and measure it on the body. I want it to be just about the length of the crystal flash that I've made, and you can measure that however you need. I'm going to switch hands, then I'm going to go ahead and secure it with a couple of wraps. And then don't do too many wraps, because then you can adjust it if you need to. So I like to pull it around the hook point. Again, make sure I have it the length that I want it. It's a little bit long for my liking, so I'm going to pull it back a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and start securing it some more. And before I bring my thread forward, go ahead and snip off the excess if you have any. And then all I'm doing at this point really is creating a clean head, making sure all of my fibers are secured and covered, and making sure I have a good place to whip finish. Once I have all my fibers covered, I'm going to go ahead and grab my whip finish tool and give it a whip finish. On this pattern, I'm just going to go ahead and give it one 3-turn whip finish, because 3 or 4 turn whip finish, because I'm going to go ahead and cover this with Solarez. So before I hit this with some Solarez, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over, and I'm going to not only coat the head of this fly with Solarez, but I'm also going to hit the thread wraps on the bottom of the dumbbell eyes and the body, the pearl tinsel body itself as well, or the flat diamond braid. And again, this isn't necessarily crucial, but it's making your fly much, much more durable, especially if you're fishing sandy or rocky bottoms with heavy weights. This isn't dragging, well, if it's dragging across the bottom of rocks or sand, it's not going to tear that pearl tinsel apart. And here, as you see that Solarez soak in, that pink color under that pearl diamond braid really starts to show through more. So that's, again, the reason why I use that pink thread. But once you've got it fully coated, go ahead and cure it with your light. And again, this was a Solarez bone dry that I used. Last step, I'm going to grab a brown Sharpie and just make some barring, some bars to make it look a little bit more natural. Again, if you fished it this way, without the bars, without the marks, I'm sure it would fish just fine. But this is how the original pattern is tied, so that's how I'm going to do it. There you have it. Again, this is the gotcha shrimp. This is, again, traditionally a bonefish pattern, but truly can be fished and modified to suit any saltwater species that you're looking to target. So go ahead and tie them up, fish them, and let us know what you think here at Precision. Thanks for tuning in.